So without further ado, I would like to recognize and welcome Mary Michael, one of our fabulous board members at the Foundation, who's going to give some introductory comments and introduce our panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you so much for being with us yesterday and today. I hope everyone enjoyed the breakfast conversations with our grantees. We are so honored and we feel privileged that we can support a lot of their great work in really moving the needle on decriminalizing mental illness. So I think that Melissa has given us a lot of great instruction about today, but I just wanted to review just a few things that we're going to be doing today. So yesterday we talked about 988. We heard some great case studies, from the city of Philadelphia, from the state of South Carolina, and other locales. And so today we're taking that foundation as well as the incredible keynote that Patrick Kennedy gave, and we're going to put that into work. Okay, so today we're going to have some contemporaneous workshops later on, and I think you're going to find that on your Whova app, which Melissa just pointed to today. We're going to be joined by psychiatrists, judges, tech leaders here to talk about some of the innovation that can be applied into this space as well. And then later on this afternoon, I hope everyone looked at the book that was in their bag, and it's called Essentialism. That almost takes me a little bit of time to practice to even say that, but we have the author, Greg McEwen, who is going to be giving us a workshop, not just on his book, but really applying it to decriminalization of mental illness. So I think that's a wonderful gift that we're all receiving, because it really makes us focus and really think about what are we going to focus in on for this particular cause. So we're going to go ahead and end the day with an optional tour of the PAFA galleries, and of course we'll have dinner here tonight. So again, everything is on the Whova app. I want to focus you into that, but without further ado, let me introduce you to my very good friend, Yolanda Lewis, who is going to talk about the panel and what they're going to be discussing this morning. So thank you again and welcome.
Thank you, Mary. Well, good morning. Welcome back to the second day of this summit. I'm so glad to see everyone here, and it's just an exciting time. I always get to see friends at these summits. My name is Yolanda Lewis. I'm the Executive Vice President of Justice and Health at the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, and I have the distinct pleasure today to moderate our first panel with esteemed jurists as well as doctors today. And so let me just take a moment.
As well as doctors.
So by the way, let me level set today. So
we're having fun.
I have worked in courts. I worked in courts for 20 years, and while I really appreciate Melissa allowing me to do this, I worked for judges for 20 years, and so I am shaking in my heels to think that I may have to cut one of them off today.
As well you should be.
As well I should see this. This is going to be hard.
As well as you should cut them off. Not shaking your heels, cut them off.
That's right. So let me take a moment to introduce, see, this is gonna be fun. Let me take a minute to just acknowledge these esteemed guests that are here today. You can take a look at their bios. They are phenomenal people. They're doing great work in their communities and across the country. But I do want to acknowledge them, Dr. Altha Stewart, who is from the beautiful state of Tennessee. Can I say that? Judge Elinore Stormer, who is from the great state of Ohio. Judge Leifman, immediately to my left, from the sunny state of Florida.
That's a good way to put it.
And Dr. Ken Minkoff, who is formerly of the Harvard Medical School.
Formerly.
Okay. He's reformed. All right. So.
And I'm currently in Arizona.
Arizona.
The great state of Arizona.
The warm
Great sunny state of Arizona.
Sunny state of Arizona.
Sunnier than
Great
So I'm excited about this. This is going to be a hard job. I am very excited about this panel today, not just because this is an important conversation, but really in my former life, I told you I was a trial court administrator, and I had the pleasure of helping judges and system leaders really think about re-engineering processes in the system to respond better to people with mental health issues. And I come from Fulton County, Georgia, which is in Atlanta, where we had huge issues around mental health. But Fulton County was not unique. As you know, court systems across the country have spent years really trying to come to grasp with this common reality that many of the individuals that come before them and the cases that come before them will include individuals with mental health issues. As a matter of fact, the National Center for State Court estimate that 70% of people in county jails and prisons across the country have a diagnosed mental illness or substance use disorders. And these are people who are 10 times more likely to be placed in jail than they are to be placed in a hospital. And if you know anything about jails, these stays in jails when you have a mental health issue become extraordinarily complex, and they are very long at times. So today, what we really are navigating, I think, is the question of how do you blend these two systems. I think it's phenomenal that we spent our time in a museum last evening. And, I'm not an artist, but I know that when you mix black and white, you get gray, like beautiful shades of gray. So today we'll talk about what happens in the gray. All right. So with that as a starter, I just want to kind of start with Judge Stormer, you. I think that judges and doctors wield an enormous amount of authority. You have the ability to command resources, you have the ability to convene stakeholders and really change practice. But let's just start where we start. Why in the heck are black robes engaging in white coat care? And then tell us a little bit about these two systems that we often get confused, the criminal and the civil legal system, and how they work.
Well, thank you, Yolanda. First, let me bring you greetings from Akron, Ohio, where it is never sunny. But we are the home of vulcanized rubber and Alcoholics Anonymous, which actually informs some of what I'm going to talk about. And to give you some context, I was a civil trial attorney before I became a judge. And then for 21 years, I was a trial judge in a civil and a criminal system. And now I am in a primarily civil system. So in the criminal system, because we saw problems with drug use, substance abuse, our jail was filling, we started the first drug court in Ohio. Then when we were running the drug court, we realized that there was a subset of people who were using drugs to treat mental illness. It turns out crack cocaine absolutely obliterates voices if you are schizophrenic, or at least I was told that anecdotally. So we realized that we couldn't continue to keep that same population together, so we started the first mental health court in Ohio, which we did after visiting the first mental health court in the country, which was in the sunny state of Florida in Broward County. And then we came back to Ohio. So we started reentry court when I was a felony judge, and now I am a civil court judge only. So what are laws? What are laws? Laws are an expression of cultural mores. So if you go back through the history of time, you see that different cultures punished certain behaviors in a certain way, or rewarded other behaviors, or said, you stole my goat, you have to give me $20. So that's the civil system. So the criminal system is a punishment system, which it says it's oriented towards rehabilitation. I think in my experience, the criminal justice system is more oriented in many ways to habilitation. That many of the people we see who have been charged with crimes, unless they are sociopaths or whatever the current word is for that, antisocial people, that they are in a chaotic lifestyle, and we are teaching them how to conform to what the mores of our culture are. And the civil system is designed originally to allocate resources in a way to achieve fairness. So there was a wrong done, and now you're going to achieve fairness in the civil system. It's usually about money, but both systems are about changing behavior. So you can be punished with money or you're banished. That's a punishment that's meant to change your behavior. The criminal justice system, you're changing your behavior through usually punishment, but now therapeutically through the treatment courts. So just to give it a context there, until sometime in the 70s, if you were the parent, a father of a child born out of wedlock, you could be charged with the crime of bastardy, which no longer exists. If you were you could beat your wife until the 50s, you could beat your children until the 50s, and we now recognize that as domestic violence. So it's an organic system that reflects the cultures at the time. So when all this got started and decriminalization of the mentally ill in the 60s, judges suddenly dealt with a larger population who had been diagnosed with a serious mental illness. And to differentiate, to me, serious mental illness is schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, or catastrophic depression. Not everybody in jail has that diagnosis. Many of them are PTSD sufferers based on lifestyles and abuse. So the criminal justice system kind of got stuck because first responders didn't know what to do with the guy raving on the corner and spitting at people. So they arrested that person for disorderly conduct. So that's a crime, has to be dealt with as a crime, but they didn't really have any place else to take them. I think in the 90s was when people began to realize, it was at one point on Time magazine, the decade of the brain, they began to realize that these were not judgments, that people were not standing on the corner because they really thought they should in a socially moire way, but because they felt that they had to do this within themselves. And we started to understand that there was a place for treatment. And in my state, they passed a law in 1998 that would allow you to civilly commit. Now, we've always civilly committed people. Judges have always had the opportunity with TB in the 1900s and you see those horrible movies where people are locked into institutions because they're mentally ill. We can pick up people who have HIV, we can take them to treatment, we can pick up people with a mental illness now and take them to treatment. The judge-involved part came later. But the two systems are meant to work symbiotically. I don't know that they always do. I can tell you from my perspective, I would love to see all the people with a diagnosable serious mental illness in my system, if they have to be anywhere at all. Thank you. Sorry.
So Judge, I just want to go back. You mentioned the word punishment, and that immediately causes a reaction because when you're talking about people with mental health issues, we've tried to shift the narrative towards care. And so I just want to just kind of ask a secondary question, pivoting from this idea of punishment and moving more towards care-focused adjudication, right? So what is the actual role of judges and psychiatrists? How do they play together in this kind of broader movement to decriminalize?
Well, I think the doctors would agree, we've been forced to work together in ways that we didn't 30 years ago. Because if you bring someone to my court who has a serious mental illness, I need to reach out and find out what kind of treatment they have, who can help them. And in my courts, the mental health court, which is criminal, and my assisted outpatient treatment court, which is civil, we have to come up with a way to symbiotically provide, if you will, rehabilitation, if you want to look at it that way. So in criminal courts, routinely they say if you don't take the meds, unfortunately I have to put you in jail, which is a big motivator for people to take the medicine. So we have to learn about the psychiatric side, and we hope, although many are reluctant, to learn about the black robe side.
Perfect. So Judge Leifman, we go way back.
And you still let me sit next to you.
I know. I remember when we first started our work in Fulton County, I think you were the first judge to come down and kind of, were you trying to whip us into shape?
I tried.
Yeah, it didn't work the first time. But the second time we met, judges were ready. And so Judge Stormer talked about this process of figuring out who can help. So let's talk about what pathways are created within the context of kind of this symbiotic relationship between mental health and legal systems, and how do we ensure people get the right care and they don't get further steeped into the criminal legal system.
And thank you, and thank you all for being here. This is really an incredibly important topic. The reality is that most of the reform in this area over the last 15 years has actually been through the judiciary. It has not been through the executive or the legislative branches, which is not necessarily a good thing, but it's the reality, and it's because of what you said. 70% of people in jail in the United States either have a serious mental illness, a substance use disorder, or both. I've actually come to a conclusion that what we probably need are specialty courts for the 30% that don't have these illnesses, and a therapeutic jurisprudence system for the 70% that do. Because the problem is, the mental health court approach, while it's phenomenal, it only impacts about 0.1% of the people that need the help. And tragically, it's often the wrong 0.1% of the people that need the help. It's the lower risk folks that are going to be fine without us. And so the good news is there's really amazing things going on, and I'm going to get to your answer in 1/2 second. But one of the things that started as a result of this, that started through the Policy Research Associates, was an organization called the Judges Psychiatrists Leadership Initiative. And there are over 4,000 judges and psychiatrists now in this loosely fitted organization that are working on this issue. And we have the American Psychiatric Association Foundation to thank as one of our main partners, as well as the Council of State Governments. And it really has led to significant reform. And it was why we were in Georgia. And we have trained dozens of judges and psychiatrists to go into the states and parachute them in and help train judges how to identify people with mental illnesses and how to use our convening power to make structural changes in the community. This has then led to some other really significant work, and it's because there isn't a lot of academic research in this area on how to do this. So we've kind of had to pave our way and kind of walking blindly, which is a problem. And so a few things that have been done over the last few years that are pretty significant that get to your answer is who should be going down these pathways and how do we do it? So there was a foundation called Equitas that brought together, I truly believe, the best minds in both the legal and medical fields for about 3 years. And we looked at a couple things. Where's the science today in mental health? Most of our civil commitment laws, quite frankly, are 50 years old. They're based on old ideas and old science. They don't reflect what we know in today's world. And how do we modernize the law so that it's more effective? And the other thing that people may not realize is that all civil commitment laws are different in each state. And so there's a lot of inconsistency in what goes on. You may get one level of service and treatment in one state and a different level in another. You would never do that with heart disease or cancer. It's just outrageous. And so this group actually worked for 3 years and put together a model civil commitment law, but we also worked on developing new pathways into the criminal justice system. And before I get to that answer, the really exciting news, and what I really want to emphasize today, is that there's an association of all the chief justices at all the state Supreme Courts and an association of all the state court administrators. And they, only for the 3rd time in their history, got involved in any issue because we're not policymakers. But this was so important to them that they created a task force on mental health. And just in July, unanimously passed a resolution adopting significant reforms and asking all 33,000 courts in America to change their behavior. And they've adopted a resolution that also calls for a 4-year implementation plan. And it adopted the work of Equitas and these new approaches. And it wasn't just to look at the criminal system, because what we realized is that our civil system's broken as badly as our criminal system when it comes to dealing with people with mental illnesses. And so it's taken this holistic approach to significantly change what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how do we get a better outcome. And so the pathway issue is, and Judge Stormer hit the nail on the head, most of these individuals should be in the civil system. They should not be in our criminal system. Aside from adjudicating them and then making it impossible to get housing and employment and hanging out with new criminals, the criminal system doesn't really do anything to help this population. Now, some people need to be in there because they have been charged or committed some really horrible offenses, but that's a very, very small percentage of this population. Most of the people that we get are really committing quality of life offenses, and they're just too sick, and they need to be in other and better systems. And so the pathways that we developed and the Conference of Chief Justices has endorsed is actually using a very sophisticated tool, and Dr. Minkoff's going to go into it a little bit in more detail, but it identifies what individuals' needs are. Remember, these are mental illnesses. It's not a mental illness. And there are different levels of acuity for these illnesses. And as Dr. Scheme knows all too well, some of these folks also have criminogenic risk factors, so we can't be naive to the population. And so how do we identify the illness? How do we identify the level of the illness? And then how do we identify the risk of committing new crimes? And once we figure all that out, which we can now do, we have developed then pathways on how to move people from the criminal system into the civil system. So the civil system is monitoring and helping them get the level of services they need, and helps us avoid them ever getting a record, and helps them, have a life of hope and opportunity. And I think that should be everybody's goal.
Thank you, Judge. I just kind of speaking about, I think you and Judge Stormer have really made the case that there's not for a single system, right? It's not that these two systems are working independently. It is how to kind of work across the line. And so, Dr. Stewart and Dr. Minkoff, I want to just kind of come to you now. And I think I've heard this said a lot in rooms and openly that, judges are judges, but they have to depend on people like you all in order to kind of think more deeply about what they're seeing before them and how to improve care. So let's talk a little bit about your role and how you are integrating and collaborating with judges to make these systems more effective for people who have substance use disorders and who have mental health concerns. And I'm going to start with,
Well, Altha and I kind of agreed
Oh,
that I would go first,
see,
because
this
I
is
have
what
this tag team
happens.
thing with Steve going on.
So
but she's going to go
this
first
is what
the next
happens
time.
when your panel turns against you.
Well, we like to think of it as supporting your role as moderator
Thank you,
and
Dr.
facilitating the flow of the conversation.
So I'm
Exactly.
shaking it.
There we
See,
go.
this is why I was shaking in my hips.
And it turns out it's the doctors who are more difficult than the
Doctors,
judges.
who knew? Who knew it would be the doctors? All right, so Dr. Minkoff.
I'm trying to think about how to make the judges more difficult. I'll figure it out. There's
got you.
another
I got you,
slide that's
Ken. I got
supposed to
you.
pop up. But I wanted to, Steve and I have this little tag team thing going, so that's why we did this. And the two slides that the second slide is supposed to appear kind of follow on one another. And so one of the things I wanted to start with, and so this was a good lead-in question about how we work together, is there are two themes that I think are very important. When Judge Leifman was saying, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, that the specialty courts should be for the people who don't have mental health and substance issues affecting their criminal activity, he's not really being tongue-in-cheek anymore. This is what we're seriously thinking about how to address. How to take this issue to scale, not just by creating special programs, but by looking at how to have impact across the entire system. And by system, that includes both the mental health system, with psychiatrists involved, and the criminal justice and civil justice, civil legal systems, both built on the idea that the overlap between the mental health and substance issues and involvement in the justice system is going to be an expectation. And so that everybody needs to understand that creating a relationship, if you're a psychiatrist, within your local community's justice system is not something that's optional. It's going to be part of your work. You need to know how to do that. And conversely, everybody needs to be in the game of building on all the things that we've learned to do over decades in the form of, what therapeutic jurisprudence looks like and what other things look like, to really try to take them to scale. So in the previous slide, one of the ways that this is happening is that judges and psychiatrists are actually working on these things together. Mm-hmm. And in the resources that were listed on Steve's slide, there are all 4 different projects that he and I have both been involved in, not just us, but with lots of other people. And some of them were justice-initiated projects that invited psychiatrists to participate, and some of them were psychiatrist-initiated projects that invited judges to participate. So it works in both directions. And those projects are intentionally designed to look at system-level change. So one of the ones, and you addressed this yesterday looking at 988, is what we call in our GAP committee roadmap to the ideal crisis system, which is designing our behavioral health crisis system on the idea that behavioral health crisis should be fundamentally a clinical response, not a law enforcement or a criminal justice response. And that's easy to say, but what's striking is how far we've come in this country without considering that an expectation or an appropriate vision or value. And so our committee with Judge Leifman, who actually started that process going because he asked us, what's an ideal crisis system? How would we develop it? We realized nobody knew. So we spent 5 years creating a roadmap for communities to actually go down that path in a tremendous level of detail for what the system should look like and how to get there within the resources available. And conversely, the things that Steve was citing around the Equitas project, how do we change all the laws? How do we create models for what legislation should look like so that these things can be more facilitated when people get involved, wherever they get involved? And same thing, how do we help state court leaders to be leaders in changing their state court systems around the expectation of people with mental health conditions? So what this leads to in one of the components of these projects is kind of thinking about a radical redesign of the justice system altogether. So if in fact 70% of people in jail have mental health and substance use disorders. And in fact, in most dockets in a typical criminal court, the majority of people will have mental health and substance issues that have impact on why they're there and or will have impact on why they will not be successful in avoiding recidivism. Some of those individuals will have the most serious mental illnesses. Some of them will not have the most serious mental illnesses. But it doesn't take a lot of mental health impairment to screw up your ability to participate successfully in probation requirements and community tenure and avoiding reoffense. So what we're recognizing is we need to think differently. So this is a big opportunity to move away from how do we find resources to work around a system that's misdesigned and develop a new system designed based on an expectation that mental health and substance use needs are going to be in the majority of dockets. Let's apply what works, the therapeutic jurisprudence strategies that we know works, but let's align them with the majority of the population. And in this work that Steve was citing, we came up with 6 routine criminal justice pathways that could be aligned in any system potentially. Now, this is not easy to do, but at least it's a vision of where to go. And they're based on criminogenic risk, the nature of the condition, its contribution to the crime, its level of severity, and the severity of the crime. Mm-hmm. And it leads to these 6 pathways that you see on the slide that I'm not going to repeat because you can all read them. But the idea of beginning to create a vision where the 5th pathway, which is the specialty court for people who do not have significant mental health and substance issues contributing to their crime, is the oddball. That would be a radical shift. Yeah. And so what we're wanting you guys to do in the spirit of this whole meeting is to dare to have this radical vision.
So I want to just kind of turn to Dr. Stewart, and I think this radical vision, what does that include, and how are you in your work also impacting the courts and how they respond to people with these conditions?
Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm normally not known as a radical, so this may be a stretch.
That's right.
For me. Just a little psychiatric humor.
Absolutely.
However,
I'm going to need therapy after this.
I got you. I just met Judge Stormer this morning, and I am absolutely impressed with her wisdom, her judgment, her ability to concretely capture a sense of where we are with this problem. I've known the 2 guys here for more years than we care to remember, but count them among my dearest colleagues and co-conspirators. I wouldn't say collaborators, but co-conspirators in this quest to improve the system. But I'm going to challenge everyone in here who's sitting very comfortably listening to all of us who know how to use our words. I'm going to challenge you to feel something for a moment in response to your question. Because we have spent this entire time and not once have we mentioned race, racism, discrimination, disproportionate representation, and a few other things that we all know are the underpinning for decriminalizing mental illness. We know we have to address those things, whether in concert, separately, as a byproduct of, or a forerunner for. We know we have to do that. And all of us with our words know that too. And I'm a woman, I think I said last night, I love words, I do words. Some of you heard my words. And so I appreciate words, but in this particular area, in this case, I think we also have to respect and appreciate and acknowledge that there are elephants in the room that we have to talk about, that when we talk about paradigm shifts, when we talk about policy changes, when my team did sequential intercept mapping, we were one of the first, and that's a nice way to take a big picture look at your system and figure out where you need and can make some changes. We were one of the first groups in the country to do it in the juvenile justice system. And all of you know, for the adults that you work with, they have a track record in the juvenile justice system long before they get into the adult mental health system or the adult correctional system. And so emotionally, I have to look at this through the lens of, I can sit here and be comfortable and talk to you about model programs and practices and share with you case examples of how the courts and the doctors often work very well together, and some of the times when we don't work so well together. But the reality is, to make any of this stuff happen, to really decriminalize mental illness, we got to start at the core of the problem. Who's in jail right now? Who are disproportionately represented in the population of people with mental illness in jail? And how do we address those particularly unique factors? Those, I know Michael Compton's here somewhere, the guy who literally wrote the book. There you are, you can't hide. Who literally wrote the book on social determinants of mental health and was brave and courageous with his colleague to talk about race as one of those factors, to talk about race in the context of poverty, social isolation, segregated residential settings, and other things that set the stage for how people come to be without resources, mentally ill, and wind up in front of one of these two guys, pleading their case to not go to jail. The basic question that you asked, I'll answer now. I really, sometimes I am filled with emotion. I'm a Southerner. I'm a frustrated actress. I really, medicine for me is a backup career because my mother.
You should have been a lawyer.
Well, I have family who are lawyers, and they tell me that all the time. But my mother was convinced that acting was not going to be a good career for me because they're out of work a lot, and so I should have a backup, and I went to medical school. Not the brightest moment of my life, but I think for purposes of why this panel is here and why it is so important that you've got two psychiatrists and two judges who know what they're talking about, who understand what this system really is about, what it needs, and not just the tweaking around the edges, but the fundamental paradigm shift that Leifman has created in his court and has seeded throughout the country, the radical ideas of Judge Stormer, that we shouldn't have people in criminal settings who are mentally ill. We really ought to handle all of this, if it's got to be in court, in the civil court. And Ken, who is the master of creating strategies and models and pathways to getting through the hurdle and overcoming the challenge. You've got the best and brightest, with the exception of me, you got the best and brightest minds
Yeah, right.
here to help you think creatively. Sozosei, creatively on how we overcome this challenge, how we create a new pathway. The focus for me, for those who've read my bio, is now on young people, on children, not juveniles, children. We dehumanize young people when we call them juveniles, and I am on a national campaign to stop doing that. You know, if we want them to grow up not going into the adult criminal justice system, we've got to do the things before they get into the juvenile justice system to help them stay out of any system. You know, we got to deal with the PTSD, the adverse childhood experiences, the domestic violence, the community violence, the poor school environments, the lack of stable housing, the lack of employment and educational opportunities to advance them on a trajectory of positive life outcome. And we have to do something about being that one adult, that single adult in the life of every child that makes a difference. Whether they're your child or somebody else's child, you can be that one adult unconditionally caring about their life outcome to the point where they begin to trust again. You heard me do my little Alexander Hamilton last night. If you remember in the title song, you know, the list of adversities that this guy had in the early stages of his life is a list of aces in today's vernacular. Mm-hmm. Bastard, abandoned by father, lost his mother after the hurricane, went to live with a cousin who died of suicide. What happened? He was taken up by the community and sent somewhere because they saw potential. That's the adult caring that prevents the judges from seeing people with mental illness and the doctors from having to work with the judges to try to keep people out of court.
Dr. Stewart, that's exactly what therapeutic jurisprudence is.
You see?
It is. That is exactly the concept of therapeutic
I'm smart enough to be up here with this panel. Thank you. I didn't have the words.
I know we're going to get to the audience questions, but I do want to take just a couple of minutes of a little bit of a deeper dive into specifically the work that you're doing. Thank you for setting that up, Dr. Stewart, in Ohio. Can you talk a little bit about AOT and how you are navigating the issues from the civil side? So as we kind of think about what's effective, we've talked about mental health course and then who they miss, but talk about AOT specifically in your courtroom.
Yeah, thank you. I would say, having heard the high-level conversation, we had an oil change ad that said, I don't want to change the world, I just want to change your oil. And honestly, that is how I approach this. We have an AOT court, and when we started it 6 years ago, there was one, and now there are 31 in Ohio, and they are spread across the country. And so I would say I'm here to represent the ground up, and I think everybody here is from a higher level than I could ever speak to. But what we are doing in Ohio, it follows the mental health court philosophy that every time a person appears before a judge for a criminal or a civil case, it can be a therapeutic moment. The judges can move that person forward in terms of behavior modification, if you will, no matter what it is that brings them there. Do they need help with housing, et cetera? So in my court, if people are committed in a hospital, they are represented by a lawyer, then they see me within 14 days. I perceive myself in that moment, as I did in the drug court and the mental health court, as a life coach and a problem solver. So my goal is to help them not go back into the criminal justice system for sure, but mostly I want to keep them out of the hospital. And truly my goal is to go out of business so that we have a mental health system that is just a health system. And I perceive that to be a value that is beyond my ability to make happen. But I can tell you we have judges all over the country in the last 5 years. In full disclosure, I'm on the Treatment Advocacy Center board, and TAC has been doing advocacy work all over the country to get laws passed that will alter the landscape for the judges. So judges sometimes have the belief that if they're not told specifically that they can do something, that they cannot. I have subscribed to the belief if you haven't told me I can't, well then by golly, I can.
That's my
And so that's how we started these courts. We didn't wait for the
Forgiveness.
legislature, but
That's
judges
right.
do, and so they're going across the country to get the laws changed. And we've met with judges all over the country from the bottom up who are starting this assisted outpatient treatment, which is judge-involved community-based treatment.
And then, I think that's such a critical piece, and it's literally kind of spreading across the country. And I know that courts have had enormous success having a different pathway to really address the issues where you don't have to be a part
Right.
of the criminal justice system
Right.
in order to get help. Because that's what it used to be. Like, families would call the courthouse and they would say, I have an issue, can you help me? And it would always be so painful to tell people to ask, like, have they been arrested?
Right.
Because that's how we had to help them. If they had been arrested, we have a program for you, maybe. But if you haven't, we have no resource. Like, this is not the right place to have that help. So, Judge Leifman, as we kind of bring this to a close, and then I want to go across the board and just ask each of you to kind of give your 30-second vision for the future. But what you've been doing in Miami-Dade for a very long time has really went far beyond mental health court. So I just want you to take just a few. First of all, let me say, I think most people admire the work that you've done in Miami-Dade, but that's not reality across the board in all places, right? So I just want to take a second for you to just explain very quickly. So how do you scale some of the work that you've been doing on the criminal side? We see AOT kind of moving across the country, but how do you kind of isolate things that other people can scale in other places?
So what we took a totally different approach because we wanted to help a lot more people and realized from all the research and data that there was limitations to mental health courts. So what we realized and recognized is we needed to do more to keep people from ever coming into our system. So we developed a very extensive CIT program. This is 23 years ago. There weren't a lot of other alternatives, and Memphis had already started CIT. We have 36 police departments, and so we had to train 36. It has been phenomenal. We have the largest trained squad of CIT police officers in the country now. We have over 8,000 officers trained at all 36 of our departments. We did a study over 10 years looking at our two largest departments, Miami and Miami-Dade. And over a 10-year period, they handled 268,000 mental health calls. But more impressively, out of those 105,000 plus calls, they only made 198 arrests. And so the number of arrests in Dade County precipitously fell from about 118,000 a year to 53,000. Our jail audit went from about 7,400 to about 4,400. We closed one of our three main jails. And that was a huge success. The other thing that we had not anticipated was that our police shootings almost stopped. And what we learned that we had not realized or recognized at all is the level of PTSD among law enforcement officers. And while race certainly can play a role and does play a role, sadly, in police shootings, it turns out that PTSD may be equally, if not more, of a factor that we never talk about. They just get scared and shoot. And so by recognizing this, because my trainer gets about 250 calls a month from police officers for their own personal mental health issues, they won't go to their departments for help. So we set up a treatment program outside the department for them to get help, and it has paid huge dividends. Last year, more police officers died from suicide than in the line of duty. And they're a mess. They have high divorce, domestic violence, and they have high substance use disorder issues, mostly from PTSD that we never talk about. And so by getting them treated had a huge impact. We also were able to get our bond rating in the city of Miami improved because they stopped shooting people. And it saved taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. But we also set up a very sophisticated post-arrest diversion system. And so if you get arrested in Miami, say on a misdemeanor, and there are competency issues, we do not order psychological evaluations. In fact, most psychiatrists that are involved in our criminal justice system are not doing assessments for treatment. They're doing evaluations to see if you're competent or not. And it turns out that's a big waste of time and money, and it's a big waste of brain power from brilliant psychiatrists. What we need them to do is to evaluate people to see what their illness is and what treatment modalities are going to work best, and then educate us on how to do that and help us change our system. And so if you get arrested on a misdemeanor within 3 days, you're out of jail, you're transported to one of our crisis stabilization units. And because you're on a criminal hold, we actually reset the case for about 2 weeks. So the 72 hours of a civil law doesn't even apply. And once the person becomes stable, we meet with them, we offer them an opportunity for the program, and if they accept, they do not get rebooked. And they go directly to the courtroom where they're met by one of our 8 peers. Our peers are the secret sauce of our recipe, and that can be replicated anywhere and everywhere. And 4 of them are graduates of our program. And they have food and clothes and medication and transportation and housing all set for the person when they get to court. A whole plan is put together, and upon successful completion, the charges are dropped. We don't want to criminalize behavior. And so recidivism in our misdemeanor program fell from about 75% to about 20%. We then, the state attorney then woke up and realized, hey, if you really want to improve public safety, get people treatment, duh. And so she allowed us to expand it to felony cases. So we do felony cases as well, but we've added a couple twists. We actually got our legislature to allow criminal misdemeanor judges in Florida to use assisted outpatient treatment laws, which is a civil law. And so we apply a civil law through a criminal court. And it's particularly for the misdemeanor population, that poor homeless man or woman who has been cycling in and out for decades, psychotic for decades, that we have not been able to help at a level we need to help. And we get them evaluated for AOT, and the criminal judge is then able to use the civil law to get them services. And it's working amazingly. And we put people on long-term injectables, and they love it, they prefer it, they stabilize quicker, and they stay stable much longer. And we also have an alternative to competency restoration program, which is an amazing program. We take people who otherwise would have gone to competency restoration, and instead we put them in a program at Jackson Memorial Hospital, and we focus on community reintegration because that's where the vast majority of people with restoration are going anyway. And then we help monitor them through a mental health type court process, and recidivism dropped from 75. Actually, for those that complete it, which is about 65, 70%, recidivism is only 6%.
Yeah.
And so this stuff works. And the last thing we're doing, because there's still 20 to 30% of the population we haven't been able to help, and it's because they're too sick and nobody has the capacity in their community to serve that population. And it's not nefarious. Look, the community mental health system in America was established for people with moderate mental health needs because the most acute people were in hospitals when we developed the system. And we just never adjusted. And so we pushed them into jail. And so we're now building the first of its kind. I know I'm out of time. Okay. So we're building this first of its kind mental health diversion facility to be done in 2 weeks, and it'll be open in the next 6 months, and it's for this very acute population. And it's all scalable because it saves money, improves public safety, it gives people an opportunity for recovery. I'm done.
I had to touch him like that.
And what he said is happening all over the country. It actually is. It's not just in Florida. It's actually happening in pockets all over the country, but it's not national. So don't be despaired if you're not in Miami.
So I know we're going to have wonderful questions for our panelists. I want to just go ahead, and if you have questions, invite you to kind of move towards the mics that are on both sides of the room if you have questions for our panelists. And as you're coming, I'm going to just ask you all to take 30 seconds. 30.
I heard you.
Okay.
30 seconds.
I'll give 10 back. I'll do 20.
Since Steve has done his 30-second summary,
It's okay. It's all good.
since he's already done his summary, and I hate following a judge, but something that he said reminded me of how I'd like to use my 30. The companion piece to help what he and others across the country are doing is developing the right psychiatric workforce. And we have got to expend the same level of initiative, innovation, creativity, and resource to creating the partners in the psychiatric community. We need across-the-board behavioral health workforce, but the key people are judges and psychiatrists, and we have to be about the business of training up our psychiatrists to understand how we work in these settings, which are not traditional psychiatric settings. We got to incorporate this stuff into our training programs. We've got to allow young people who come with this spirit of social justice and commitment to community to learn to work in these spaces.
Amen.
And we can do that. So we're going to join forces with our judge colleagues and figure out. That's my aspiration for my 30 minutes.
I love
30,
it.
I'm
I love
sorry,
it.
30 seconds.
It's okay. So, Dr. Minkoff, can I turn to you? Vision for the future. What you're
30
hopeful
seconds.
about? 30 seconds.
Okay, yeah, sure, 30 seconds. So the first thing that I want everybody to think about is the power of taking these broad steps that we've talked about and bringing them back home to build on what's happening locally and expand your capacity to do grand things in your own backyard. When people hear from Steve, you know, there's one thing that I always pick up on. He said, we started this 20 some odd years ago. Okay, so you don't get to where Steve's community is overnight. You start with slow steps in your own world back home. And everybody has things that you can do in your own program, in your own agency, in your own community. But one of them is like building that relationship so that the separate components in your community move from being separate components to being a we that does these things and builds on what's gone before. And
That was for you. You heard it.
Okay.
You're good.
why am
so
I
let
the
me just
only
say-
one who gets
Thank you,
timed
Melissa.
out?
No, I'm watching the timing
All
for
right.
my 30
Just
seconds. I would build on what he said, and I think judges are remarkably placed to convene. We have the ability to make phone calls and bring people together when we see a problem. And most of the judges I know who started mental health courts, which we started ours in 2000, were judges who were frustrated. So what's the definition? We've all heard doing the same thing and expecting a different result. They just couldn't do it anymore. And they said, we just can't stand it. We need to come up with a new system. So it was generated initially from judges who just couldn't take it anymore and they weren't going to do it. So if you can get a judge who's a champion, you can find one person who's a champion who can convene, that to me is the beginning of the secret sauce. That's the roux of the secret sauce. So that's my vision would be you have everybody working symbiotically across all silos.
Wonderful. And Judge Leifman will.
He's done his stuff.
Okay.
He's done.
My doctor has spoken.
He has done his 30 seconds, people. All right, so our panelists are open to take questions. We have one virtual questions, but before we get to that, I'll take a question here.
Oh, for me? Oh, thank you. Wonderful panel, thank you. My name is Christina Sparrock. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and the founder of Person-Centered Intervention Training, where I trained anybody in the community on culturally responsive, trauma-informed, and person-centered care, and I would love to train you guys one day. So, and I understand, thank you for mentioning about the social determinants of health, which is very critical, and for the gentleman's book in here, I would love to buy the book, because that's, who? Perfect.
Michael, raise your hand. I don't get any royalties.
Right, because that's definitely, our policies and procedures are rooted in systemic racism, structural racism. My question today is, have you considered having peers at the table as to help
Always.
with strategy, creative solutions, because people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. I'm a peer. I like being at the table, and I like sharing my experiences to help inform policy.
Yes.
So the short answer is absolutely. More than a third of my staff have lived experiences.
Absolutely.
So can we go to this side?
First of all, giving thanks to my sister who kind of took some of what I was going to say. My name is Skip. I am the executive director of the New York City Justice Peer Initiative, where we're building justice peers on a framework of peer support, taking that out of behavioral health and moving that directly into the criminal justice system. Peer support is a secret sauce. I rarely hear about peer support. I rarely hear about the expertise of those with lived experiences. As for myself, I'm directly impacted by the criminal justice system and the mental health system and the substance abuse system. I would not have been cycling through the criminal justice system for 20 years if it wasn't for my mental health diagnosis and my substance abuse addiction. So everything that we're talking about is great and valid. And I'm also speaking from a hat of being a criminologist. I'll be entering into a master's PhD program in the fall. Everything is great, data, numbers, figures. Where are the voices of those with lived experiences? Why are we not sitting up there with you?
Because we only had an hour.
See, why are we not there? Because we are closest to the solution, because we've been part of the problem. There should be no reform. We cannot decriminalize mental illness and behavioral health without creating space from those of us who have walked those footsteps, who have lived in that.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you.
So we have a question from our virtual audience, so I want to make sure we give them fair due as well. The question is that we know that AOT and mental health courts work for many, but who don't they work for and why don't they work for them?
Well, sometimes people just leave, and we can't really control for that. But of the people who participate in the program, at least in my AOT program, only 2.5% come back over a 5-year period. So we know it does work for the largest majority of people. And of the 2.5% who've come back, most of them acknowledge that if they had just stayed on their medicine, they probably wouldn't be back in the program. So we see it longitudinally as working. The ones who don't are anosognosia. It's a symptom of their mental illness. They don't know they're ill, and it just is undeniable to them. They will never really want to participate. So what we try to do is sort of work around them. In the mental health court system, our recidivism rate was about 7%, so it works for 93% of the people. And I wish we knew the actual answer as to how we keep people who abscond to get them back to us, but I don't have that answer.
Go ahead, Chris.
All right, Chris?
Chris, APA Foundation. Ditto, everything was just said at the microphones. Judges are experts in the judiciary. Psychiatrists are mental health experts. We are missing that community member with lived expertise on this panel. I have 2 questions. One, what was the involvement of peers in the development of the resources, especially the ideal crisis system? And then 2, can you just speak towards how you eliminate barriers for hiring peers, especially within county and elected governments? Because I think that's a huge barrier that we need to address.
So let me respond to the first part of the question about the ideal crisis system. We were honored and blessed to have Kara Smyrick, who had been the peer recovery coordinator for SAMHSA, and then the director of peer services for Los Angeles County Mental Health. At the time, she was to work with us on our committee to help develop the report. So that was a wonderful thing for us to have her input, because she's brilliant. And actually, I just wanted to segue, because one of the things in the AOT question is that AOT is, in and of itself, just the legal involvement doesn't get you there unless you have the supports and the services to help people be successful. So, and peer support is a very important part of that.
If I could just add on the barriers. We actually, with the help of the Florida Supreme Court last year, we were able to change the law in Florida to make it easier for peers, people with lived experiences, to work as peers in all of our systems around the state, and it's had a huge impact. But we also need to do training, and we need to help people participate. But I would say that, you know, a lot of what you're hearing are also the voices of our peers. I have learned more about these problems and the issues from people with lived experiences, and then try to translate that into good policy. And we just couldn't do what we did without our peers. It's just, you know, I don't think people realize that for most people, by the time they get arrested in the criminal justice system, they often have clinical depression on top of their serious mental illness, because the system is just beating the crap out of them. And it's not always that they don't want to take medication. They don't care if they breathe. the system is that bad and that harmful and that tragic. And the peers that work for us are able to reestablish relationships with this population, which then incentivizes them to want to get better. Yeah. And so I think it's made all of us better, all of us smarter, and all of us more thoughtful on approaching these issues, seeing this issue through the eyes of our peers, and then the people who come before us. And so it is changing. And so for the peers out there, God bless you, but also understand we're listening, and we're allies in the fight, and it's really changing.
It's a nothing about you without you. I think most of the people who do this have that philosophy ingrained in our system.
Yeah.
We're gonna hopefully have a chance to take one more question, and so.
Good morning. My name is Sozosei Shoinka. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Philadelphia's Department of Mental Health. First of all, thank you for an excellent panel. And beyond that, thank you for your years of work and advocacy in this area. I want to piggyback on Dr. Stewart's question. During COVID, about the disproportionate representation of minorities in the system. During COVID, as we all know, there was a move to empty out the jails, and we certainly saw that here in Philadelphia. We have a justice division, behavioral health and justice division, that works extensively in the criminal justice system. And we track numbers. And in that period of release, guess who did not get released? People with mental health challenges. And of that population, guess who else did not get released? The numbers actually went up for persons who both had a severe mental illness and were persons of color.
Right.
So my question is to the panel, can you share thoughts on best practices to prevent that?
Eliminate racism would be a start. Eliminate stigma. I just want to change your oil.
Yeah, I would.
Do you want to put in a plug for the SMART tool and then?
I was just thinking the same thing.
God, come on.
You would do that.
I was just thinking the same thing. Ken, go.
Oh, you want me to do that? All right. So the reason we're playing this game is because in the American Association for Community Psychiatry, which Altha is the president of and I'm on the board of, we created a tool called the SMART tool, self-assessment for modification of anti-racism tool, which is a clunky way of getting at an acronym. But the idea is to really hand back to organizations, specifically designed for behavioral health organizations, the challenge of addressing structural racism in the organization, not conceptually, but actually looking at what your data show and what your practices are, so that you are, have to look at what's really going on structurally and develop strategies to improve it. So the lead authors were Rachel Talley and Dr. Shoinka here, and I was the third author, which is why I was thinking he should promote it, because he did it. And the point is that what he said is part of the feature. Yep. Okay, he started by being courageous enough to actually look at the data of what was going on in the system, and then to begin to do things to address it, which you did do some things to try to address it. Maybe you could share that with the audience and answer your own question.
We're out of time.
Oh, then you'll have to ask him later.
Catch him at the break.
So I want to just, this is an incredibly important and insightful conversation, and that's why there are so many people lined up on both sides. I would encourage you, our panelists are going to be here for the duration of the day. I would encourage you to corner them and have more insightful conversations.
That sounds like encouraging people to be stalkers.
That was not the intent. Okay. That was not the intent. But I want to just kind of wrap up a little bit of what all of them said, is that we need to continue to challenge ourselves to be passionate and to be creative and understand how these systems blend. And ultimately, the goal is to bring all of these separate systems into a space where we can call it us and we. And so if you would, just please give our panelists a great round of applause.
Thank you to our moderator.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yolanda.
for wrangling us doctors and lawyers.
This way?
That was indeed a wonderful panel. Thank you again. I also want to thank the folks who are asking such great and provocative questions. We're going to take a short break now. We have some wonderful free time together today, so I do encourage you to find our panelists. Lunch is an hour and a half to sit with them, not corner them, and have those chats. We're going to be back in this room at 10:30, and you're going to have a very special treat. We've all gotten quite accustomed to pivots and changes during COVID. We're doing a pivot and change. So at 10:30, rather than our full panel, you're going to have a treat to hear from one of the most brilliant minds in this work, Dr. Z Sun, who's going to do a TED style talk about his work, which is quite innovative and exciting. So please enjoy some refreshments in one another's company.